Hello, everybody. My name is Dave Jackson, and you're listening to Tales from the Backlog. This is a video game deep dive review podcast where each week I'm joined by a guest to bring a game out of the backlog, play it, and discuss. My guest today is a friend of the show, host of Pixel Project Radio podcast, and if you can't find him, check up on your local telephone wires. Welcome back to the show, Rick Firestone.
Hey, Dave. Thanks for having me back. I am really looking forward to talking about this game. A little peek behind the curtain. You had reached out to me a while ago. You were like, hey, here's a list of games.
Yeah.
Why don't you choose one? You can come on. And on that list were both Lisa the Painful and Night in the Woods. So like any good friend, I bribed Dave, and I said, yeah, I'll be on both of those. And he took the money, and here I am.
Exactly, yeah. It was a generous bribe package from you. It worked wonders, and that Lisa the Painful episode was also really, really good. So if anyone here has not listened to that, I recommend going back and checking that out. Rick's also been on the show many other times. It's too many to list out at the top of the show anymore, but we did Lisa the Painful most recently. We're here for Night in the Woods, and Night in the Woods. It's a side-scrolling narrative adventure game developed by Infinite Fall and published by Finji for contemporary platforms in 2017. Night in the Woods has 3 primary design credits to Alec Holoka, Scott Benson, and Bethany Hockenberry. If this is your first time listening to the show, first of all, thank you for stopping by. Here's the spoiler policy for today. As always, we're not going to spoil the story in the first main section of the episode. You can check down in the show notes for when spoilers begin, after which we will have all of the spoiler talk after that, and discussion more in depth about what this game's story is all about, in our opinions. So if you don't want to be spoiled, you are okay for a while. So what is Night in the Woods? We have our elevator pitches at the top of the show here. I say bounce on telephone wires, do crimes, be a trash mammal, and figuratively get punched in the gut repeatedly. Rick, what is your pitch for Night in the Woods?
Okay, would you believe me if I told you that I tested this on a real... Wait, no, I did that joke on Lisa the Painful. I can't do it again. I won't. I shan't.
I was ready to play along this time. Come on.
My Night in the Woods elevator pitch. This is a meditation on homecoming, the young adult experience of blossoming independence, and small town beliefs and ideals.
So we got the real elevator pitch from Rick, and then the goofy stuff in my pitch. Together, we might be able to sell a game.
I think together they paint a very accurate picture of what this game actually is.
Yeah, 100%. Good teamwork, Rick. I played this on Steam Deck via itch.io. I got this in the Racial Justice Charity Bundle on itch a couple years ago, and you may have too. If you bought that bundle, you own Night in the Woods. You may have also gotten it free on Epic, and it's also just available basically everywhere now. It took me around 10 or 12 hours to beat. Rick, does that sound right to you? I know you've played this multiple times.
Yeah, I think 10 to 12 is about right.
Fair enough. So we start the show, as always, with our personal histories with Night in the Woods. And my personal history with this game largely, like we said in Lisa the Painful, largely starts with you, Rick. So I will throw to you first. I act like I don't do this on every episode, but the guest goes first. Tell me about your personal history with Night in the Woods.
Yeah, sure. So we covered this on Pixel Project Radio back in 2022, I believe, back in September of 2022. It's like episode 40 or something. And this was a pick of my co-host at the time, Ben. And it was one that, it was a game that I had known about for a long time, but it fell into that category that we all have, that category that's, I'm sure I will like this and I want to play it, but maybe not right at this minute. We'll wait a little bit. And so I played it and was just blown away by how much I enjoyed it. I really, really resonated with me very strongly back then. And I've since replayed it. I replayed it for this show, obviously. And I re-listened to my episode on it, which is something I tend not to do all the time, but it still holds the same weight that it did for me back then. The game does. I still really, really enjoy this game. I played this back then on Steam Deck. I played it this time on Steam on my Legion Go. It works great. I do have it for Switch and PlayStation, but I haven't played on those platforms yet. I can't imagine it runs any worse. I'm sure it's great.
Yeah. So like I said, it was basically your episode on Pixel Project Radio that made me interested in playing this because, like I said, it released in 2017, and I had probably never heard of this until maybe 2020 or something like that. Just kind of like a title that came up every now and then, listening to other shows and stuff like that. And your episode on PPR was the first time that I ever heard, like, what is this game actually? What is it about? Things like that. And so after everyone's done listening to this episode, go listen to Rick's episode, because Rick and Ben will surely have a different conversation than the two of us are going to have here today to some degree. But like I said, I got it in one of those charity bundles, and it was just kind of sitting in the backlog, waiting for me to have a good reason to play it. So I actually put it on my backlog resolutions list for 2024, trying to make sure that I actually get to some of those games that I'm interested in, but maybe later, and then maybe later turns into years and years. So to get into our quick top-down thoughts at the top here, I also really, really enjoyed this. And one of the things that struck me was I remember talking to you after your episode came out about how this game's setting is very familiar to you. It is a part of the country that is it's almost like telling the story of where you're from. And I had wondered, it's not where I'm from, so am I going to have that same experience? And it turns out that that familiarity does not exclude you from connecting with the personal things that are going on, or the socioeconomic themes that the game is talking about. So I really, really like this game. And I think I've seen lots of other takes about this game out there. And I think that this game is doing some things in a more subtle way than a lot of people are looking for or expecting, we'll say. So I really dug that. I love the way that they explored the character of May, the protagonist. I love the way that what's going on in town is represented through what happens in the story. I love May's relationship with her friends, and it's a different story than I had expected. It's different from a lot of video game stories, and I also really, really enjoyed what this game was doing. So this is going to be one of my favorite games that I played in 2024, and we're going to have a lot to talk about, so I'm going to shut up now. But top level thoughts from you. You picked this from my list. You obviously enjoy this.
I do, and I'm largely just going to sort of respond to what you were just saying here. Like you, I've also seen a lot of conversations recently about Night in the Woods, largely just due to coincidence, I think. But it's also caused me to seek out other videos and general responses and reads of this game. And I am largely unsatisfied when I see a lot of what folks are talking about whenever they're diving into this game. And I think you and I can parse out to a bit of a greater degree, if I may say so, some of the more subtle and interesting questions this game is positing, because it is not it's not as simple as just saying this game is about capitalism and it's cozy. It's technically correct, but that paints such a reductive picture of it. I think there's a lot here. You are right. This is based on southwestern Pennsylvania. Scott and Bethany are from, I want to say central and southwestern Pennsylvania, respectively, but that might be backwards. And when Scott and Alec were getting ready to create this game, Scott took Alec around southwestern PA, around I think Johnstown and Cambria County, just to explore and get inspiration for the settings. And I lived there for a time. I student taught in Cambria County, and I still live in the suburbs of southwestern Pennsylvania. So, I'm going to help Yins get down into the town of Possum Springs. Be careful, the roads are a little bit slippy. We'll get on the food donkey, maybe cheer on those smelters, go smelters. And we're just going to go down and have a good time.
All right. Well,
I won't do that anymore throughout the episode.
I was just going to say, you had better keep that accent up.
I can't. I don't think I can.
All right. Well, for now, we're going to put a pin in talking about it. We'll listen to a bit of music. We'll come back and talk about the story in Night in the Woods. Night in the Woods story writing credits go to Scott Benson and Bethany Hockenberry. The game is set in the fictional town of Possum Springs, modeled after a Rust Belt town, although some clues in-game, like Rick mentioned, the local football team, the Smelters, you can safely assume that, directly Pennsylvania here, around the Pittsburgh area. So, in Night in the Woods, you play as May Borowski, who is a young feline woman. All the characters in this game are anthropomorphic animals. It is just the style that the artist decided that they did the best. There is no deeper meaning to the fact that May is a cat. That is from Scott Benson himself. May has just returned home after a few years away at college. It's hinted that things did not really go well there. And part of the story is May reintegrating into her hometown, and then you're going to find out through the story what happened to cause her to go back home. But no more spoilers here. We'll talk about that later. I wanted to start this out just by talking about May, because one of the big things I hear people talk about, for good reason, is May, the protagonist, and her as a character. I think she is really, really interesting, likable, but a super flawed character. And I think that this starts up a bunch of conversations, because one of the things I see out there, which I kind of agree with, is that May's not a really good person. She's not a great friend. She's selfish. She doesn't seem to listen to people very well. And I think that clashes with like an innate want that we have to like and relate to our protagonists. And this is a really interesting setup for the vehicle you're going to experience this story through.
Yeah, that's something that a lot of people will clue into, the flawed nature of May. I'm not so quick to attach this notion or characterization to her that she is a bad person, because that's one of the things that this game, I think, indirectly asks, or at least asks you to consider, is what do we mean whenever we call or characterize somebody as being a good or bad person? I think this game, and this is a video game too, right? This isn't quite like real life where we can, we are expected to simply take what is presented to us, and that is the whole entirety of the thing, because it's a piece of media. But I don't necessarily view May as a bad person. I think she can act like a bad person, but I don't know that characterizes her as an entire human being in her own right, cat being in her own right. I think there is an interesting nature versus nurture angle to this as well, where May's upbringing and her circumstances sort of foster this naivety that she has, and influences the way that she acts and the way that she speaks to some of her other friends, which I'm sure we'll get into as time goes on. I'm not disagreeing with you right out of the gate, by the way. I think I'm more hesitant these days to just say somebody is a bad person, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. I think maybe that was just too much of a shorthand on my part, because I agree, she's not like, the worst person. Like, she is legitimately kind and helpful and things like that to people all the time. She's just not consistently like that. I think she consistently pushes her beliefs on people. She doesn't listen to what people are saying. She has a very rude streak towards anyone who she thinks is an authority. So she's complicated, for sure.
And, so too were we all whenever we were in this stage of life. She's in that weird transitional period between being a child, like in high school, and being a full-fledged adult in the world. And that's a lot of what this game's thematic motif center around, is this idea of what does it mean to blossom into an individual and grow up, right? Especially whenever you're doing it at a different rate from your peers and in the same town that you were a child in.
Yeah. where like the eventual like point that I was leading to with that is that I think the writing and characterization of May is really fascinating and ultimately really, really good and realistic because, like you said, if you can kind of put yourself in your own shoes back when you were 20 years old, maybe you weren't, a petty criminal like May is, but maybe you were not always the best friend. Maybe you were selfish. Maybe you went to college and picked up some, college kid progressive views that you then pushed on everyone who would listen to you or something like that. So we set up May as like this very complicated character, and that writing that makes her that way is really, really good. And then, as you said, this is a bit of a coming of age story with May, but it's different from like The Lion King or something like that. Like it's much more nuanced than a lot of coming of age stories would be. I don't want to say too much here, but you're not saving the world in this game. May is not a hero. And it's much more, subtle than that. I'm running out of adjectives.
Hey, it's okay. No, it is subtle. You are exactly right. One of the reasons that I think this game succeeds in how it is being subtle and making this coming of age story so meaningful is that it nails the young adult voice in a way that I don't often see. I saw a comparison to Life is Strange recently with this game, and I had some of those comparisons when I first played this as well. And I won't go into what was being said before, but when I think of Life is Strange and this game side by side, I always think about how they handle, respectively, the young adult voice. And I think Night in the Woods does it much better than Life is Strange. It's less of a caricature and it feels less performative. And what I mean by performative is exactly that, a performance. You and I grew up roughly around the same time. I'm a little younger than you, but we were in middle school and high school in the early 2000s. And, Life is Strange, we talked and dressed like that, Now I'm going to be self-conscious about the Pittsburgh thing. We talked and dressed like that. It felt very much like adults writing that kind of language. It very much felt like almost a parody, whereas this feels significantly closer to what is reality. Maybe not one-to-one, but I mean, I see a lot of myself in these characters, and I see a lot of my friends from that time period in these characters, and the way that they speak is a large part of that.
Yeah, the just the general like writing and dialogue in here is consistently really good, and it's a good thing because this game is light gameplay. You run around town, you have some little light platforming to do, but this game is largely reading conversations with some little shakeups in gameplay every now and then. But I never got bored of talking to people. Like the main thing that you do in this game, because May is coming back home and reconnecting with people, the main thing you do each day is May wakes up, you go outside, maybe you talk to your mom in the kitchen, but then after that you go outside and you make your way through the town and just talk to people that are around town. And I legitimately looked forward to talking to everybody each day and seeing what's going on, not just with May's main friends, who we'll talk about here in a second, but with the random people just like sitting on a porch on the side of the street, or going up and talking to the pastor, or the homeless guy sleeping behind the church. Like, I wanted to talk to everybody because the way they're characterized and the way the dialogue is written is really, really good. And it does feel real. Some things are very, very close to home. And like I'll use a word you said, not caricature-ish. Like, some of the characters, the way that they act and the things that they do might be considered a little caricature-ish and, a little over the top. Like, Greg steals an animatronic, Chuck E. Cheese robot from a, from a store as a gift. Like, things like that are a little less than realistic, but the writing, the way people talk to each other is real.
Yeah, well said. It really is. Yeah, I think there's going to be a lot to talk about.
For sure. Yeah. So May connects with her main friends from high school. The main three that you hang out with the most are Greg, who is a canine guy, B, who is I thought B was a dinosaur. It turns out maybe an alligator, crocodile. and then Greg's boyfriend named Angus, who is a bear. And each day you go out, you talk to people. Eventually you will end up going out, seeing what Greg and B and Angus are up to. And then you can choose whether you want to hang out with Greg or hang out with B most days. There are other little like hangouts that can pop up if you talk to the right people enough times. And then eventually you get one shot to hang out with Angus during a particular thing. We'll talk about that later. But you get to choose whether you're going to hang out with Greg and B. These two characters are both really, really awesome. And like, I love Angus too, of course, but these are the two you hang out with the most, B and Greg. And I chose to hang out with B most of the time, not because I didn't like Greg, but just because I hung out with B once and that hangout was so interesting and the dynamic between the two of them was so good that I just wanted more of that. But this main friend group, I think, is really fantastic too.
And it's very well realized as well, because you had mentioned there's one hangout with Angus. How often have we been in friend groups where there is that one friend that we're comfortable with in a group setting, but you just one-on-one just doesn't work, you know?
Yeah.
It's sort of like that, and that just felt very well realized to me. This playthrough I did all B, just because my first playthrough I did all Greg. There's stories and there's not really routes in this game. You know, You're not going to get the B route or the Greg route, not really. I think their hangouts are very beautiful for very different reasons.
Yeah, from what I've heard about, what happens when you hang out with Greg, there's more than meets the eye. The first time I hung out with Greg, we just did some crime together. But as those hangouts go, from what I've heard, there is more there for sure. Bees was super interesting. I can't wait to talk about them in the spoiler section. But these hangouts set up maybe my favorite theme that this game explores, which is what it's like to, be part of the friend group, leave, and then come back years later. And you are a different person. Everyone else is a different person, but you expect things to be the way they were when you left. And there's an adjustment that May has to go through when she goes back to town, and she doesn't have a job, but everyone else, they can't hang out because they're working, unless Greg just wants to leave work whenever he feels like it or something. But this is really interesting to see the adjustment, how May's ready to jump back into the way things used to be, but that's just not how things work anymore.
Yeah, and it's something that many of us have been through as well. Especially Dave, I know you had gone to college, I had gone to college, and every time, we come back from college or grad school or whatever to our hometown, the way that I've described it before is that colors seem a little more muted than they did previously, especially if it's a small town like this. You had mentioned at the very top that not being from southwestern PA is not going to dampen your experience with this game. And I agree. I mean, there's certainly more small towns than just southwestern Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
The nice thing about being from here is you see little nods in the game, like Arnold Applebaum, and you think, oh, that's literally just Andrew Carnegie. Or you see May's very inclined street, and you're like, oh yeah, that's Squirrel Hill. I know that place. I've walked there. But yeah, this idea of coming back to your small town where it almost feels like time has halted in a way. Time is forever frozen in this sort of area. Whether that's positive or not, that's up to the viewer. And I think we'll get more into that as the plot goes along. But yeah. Ooh, so much good stuff to talk about after the spoiler wall.
Yeah, for sure. It's one of those episodes. Yeah, I was playing this and thinking about my own experience, and I didn't really have this experience when I went to college because all of my main friend group also went to college. So we all left and then came back for the same holidays and things like that. But it was this way when I moved overseas. And suddenly, I went back to my hometown twice in 7 years. And then I moved back to my hometown while we were getting situated when we moved back to the US. And that was like stepping out of the time machine in the way that this game deals with too. Some things have changed, some things haven't, but it's definitely not the same as you remember it. And I like the kind of metaphor that you used where you say the colors have dulled a little bit. And I think that gets stranger and stranger as you get older. And, depending on how often you go back, if you ever do, it might continue to evolve that way. But this was really cool. Like this game, we'll bring up a couple of other themes here in a second, but this is one of my favorite things because like no one explores this in video games. I've never seen this in another game. And that's like what this game is largely about.
Yeah, there's so many different ways to do that idea of homecoming, and this one is so great.
One of the other things that you mentioned is the focus on these like small industry towns, like we had said, Rust Belt inspired. What happens in these industry towns when the industry goes away or when it's, fading and things like that? And Possum Springs is struggling. They had prosperous mines there at one point. Then there was a factory. Everything is closed now. And people have had to take on, whatever jobs are available, but they're either not as well paying or the cost of living has gotten higher or probably both. So people are struggling in this. And again, it's one of those things where it's more subtle, I think, than you might expect when you hear us say that that's something the game tackles. It's not like you're walking around town and like people are like moaning in the streets or something like that. It's in like little conversations when people let the veil down and they let you know what they're really thinking inside. B's conversations are a great window into this, as are talking to May's dad if you get the chance. And there's a character named Selmers who, if you choose to go to a certain optional thing, you'll get like a very loud, here's how I feel about this poem, which I think is really, really great. The poem reads, and I'll have an excerpt from it here. The poem, part of it says, "Babyface boy billionaire, phone app sold, made more money in one day than my family over 100 generations, more than my whole world ever has. World where house buying jobs become rent paying jobs, became living with family jobs," which is, you want to nail down what this game is showcasing with a short little excerpt. That poem is fantastic.
And that poem, we should say, comes after you being conditioned to Selmer's poems being very amateurish, such as "When I feel a blueness, all I need is a Eunice."
Yeah.
And even in the game, May is like, holy crap, what is that?
Yeah.
It's very cool. This is, we keep calling this subtle, and it's true, it is. But one of the reasons that I think that is, now that we're talking about the town setting, is, Scott and Bethany or Bethany lived in this town. Essentially, they lived in Possum Springs. I lived in Possum Springs. It's, it's a direct reference to Pittsburgh's coal mining and steel mill industries. And once those jobs dried up, what happens? You still see abandoned steel mills and coal mining sites around here all the time. And the small towns now, like you said, what do? Those folks now work at the chain stores, the Dollar Generals, the Family Dollars, the Walmarts, and the impact that generational poverty, which is another big theme in this game, has on towns and the people within it, is on full display here. It's great.
And then that leads into another thing that this game comments on, where there are some real world political commentaries going on in here. Those are things that, again, are not super obvious as you go. They're kind of something where you have to connect the dots a little bit to, I think you can easily map on some of the belief systems of people in the town onto real world things, especially things that were happening while this game was being developed. We said this game came out in 2017. Big changes in U.S. politics in 2016. So this, I think, again, without yelling it from the rooftops, I do think this game has something to say about politics, but not necessarily like this is right or wrong, in my opinion. It's more of like, how did some of these people end up here? Like, the right or wrong judgment is on us to decide whether we agree with, political stances or whatever. But I think that this game does take some time to explain how some people got to some of these belief systems. And it's not like it's not like they just say like, oh, this is a Republican town. We're all Republicans. This is, this is why we feel this way. It's given through a different lens, and it's more interesting for that.
Yeah. I think for the politics, I think I'll save what I want to say until we get there after the spoiler wall.
Sure.
This is a game that was made during its time, 2017, and obviously it was in development before that too. And I think knowing that is important whenever we get eventually to what this game is saying about that particular, group of people, that particular ideological belief. I think that's important to keep in mind.
Yeah. So we have a lot of stuff to save for the spoiler section, but there's going to be a lot of great stuff to talk about there. I guess the last thing I'll bring up is I kind of found the pacing of this game to be odd. I thought this game ended way sooner than I thought it was going to, and the last, let's say, so if I played for 12 hours, I would say the last 2 hours contains a lot, and then it finishes really, really quickly. And it's not that I'm dissatisfied with the ending and like what happens. I think there was a lot that happened in a very short amount of time, and then the game was over, and I wouldn't have minded a couple more hours.
Oh, I saw whenever I was preparing for this, as a studious guest does, whenever I was preparing for this, I saw a note that you made about the ending, and I really disagree with it. And I'm really excited to have a friendly sparring match about that whenever we get there. I'm a well-known lover of the ending of Disco Elysium and The Sopranos. So, and this, I think, has a lot in common with those. It doesn't fade to black immediately, don't worry. But
right.
Yeah. I hate to keep saying like I'll save it until after the spoiler wall, but there's just so much context there that we can't spoil right now.
Right. Okay. Well, I don't know what it is that we're going to be sparring about, so we will say for one final time, we'll stop talking about the story now. We'll listen to a bit more music, and when we come back, we'll talk about the presentation in Night in the Woods. All right, let's start by talking about what this game looks like. The art is credited to Scott Benson. Again, in a talk at GDC, Scott Benson mentioned that the animal designs of the people are mainly just because he felt that was what he drew the best. So he went with that. Again, no special meaning to the fact that they're animals. This game has a really unique visual style of characters and environments and things kind of made out of simple shapes, we'll say. Almost like a very fancy version of construction paper or South Park for another media comparison with the way that character designs are, the way that, environments look and things like that. But much more autumn tone to it, which is why this game is coming out in November on the podcast here. A little theming on the podcast for once. It's not just October. We got fall games too.
Yeah, we got both kind of games.
That's right.
October and fall. I like simple shapes. That was an intentionally chosen phrase, and I like that. I just wanted to put that out there. It's funny. Scott sometimes, or at least he used to, would just post doodles of like these cat characters, and people would always be like, "Oh, that's May. That's one of May's family members." And at one point, he responded, "He's like, no, this is just how I draw cats.
Yeah,
like it's not that deep, bro." And that's great. That's so good.
Yeah, and the follow-up game that was announced, Revenant Hill, which was, not a sequel to Night in the Woods to my knowledge, but still showcased that same art style. Real shame that game got canceled. And, hopefully everything is going okay with everybody's health is the reason the game was announced to be canceled. But this is just the art style of the artist. So this is what we got. I think it looks cool. I really liked just the simplicity of it, but the amount of detail and character to Possum Springs, despite, we'll say like a lack of like really close detail, I suppose.
Yeah, I really love the way the art looks. I do. I love when May's eyes get real large her pupils dilate.
Yeah.
I think it's so funny. I love the way that her little mouth, she has just a little cat mouth. I love how it flips from a little frown to a little smile, depending on her mood. It looks really great. I could see myself getting a tattoo of something from this game. I still don't have like a tattoo yet, but this game's a contender. I could see it.
Yeah, and it is super like recognizable. Someone who would see that would be like, "Oh yeah, Night in the Woods," or they would be like, "Oh yeah, Scott Benson's doodles from Twitter, not Night in the Woods."
Yeah.
Character designs are great, so I'm glad you brought that up. Everyone in town that you're going to go out and talk to, the characters that are, let's say, like the secondary characters that you'll go out and talk to, everyone has a really recognizable design to them. I never found myself like really getting people mixed up, whether it's the clothes they wear or the animals that they're modeled after. Those are good. But those little touches stick with you too. Like, I love the fact that Bee has a little cigarette that's not attached to her mouth. It's just kind of floating out there. I love that. Greg has this really mischievous face on most of the time. He's always excited, ready to go, cause some mayhem out in town. And of course, the excited wiggling arms animation that the characters do, which I think is very charming and cute.
I like that Greg always wears a little greaser jacket. Like he reminds me of a 50s greaser, like a little tough punk kid.
Yeah. Is he going to go out and smash some light bulbs, have a good time after work?
Yeah, I mean, as we all have.
Yeah.
And then to contrast that, his boyfriend is Angus is just real buttoned up sweater vest kind of guy, or sweater vest, little dapper hat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, all the character designs are cute, and again, they help you remember the people and not just the main 3 or 4 characters. The music in Night in the Woods is credited to Alec Holoka, Scott Benson, Charles Huettner, and Sven Ruthner. Apologies for names, but music in this game is there's two types of things to talk about here. There's like the in-game music as you're walking around town or during scenes and conversations and things. There's also the like rock music because May and her friends are in a band, and that's what they do on a lot of the days when you go out and hang out. Once everyone's finished with work or when they decide that they're just going to leave work, you go out and have band practice. So let's start with those band songs. How did you feel about those?
I mean, I like them a lot. I think that they lead off with their best one, which is titled Die Anywhere Else.
Yeah.
I like that one significantly more than the rest. But no, they're cool. I mean, they're fun. They're a nice contrast to the overworld and walking around exploring music. The minigame itself is, it's fine. There's one song that I think is just entirely too hard, and I don't know why they made it that hard. But I think that's Pumpkinhead Guy. But no, I mean, it's so fast and it's too hard. But otherwise, yeah, I thought this was cute. I really liked it.
Yeah, so it's like a Guitar Hero-ish mini game that you play during band practice. May is the bass player in the band, and she makes a mention that like she hasn't played bass in a while and she doesn't know a lot of the songs that they're playing. So that kind of excuses, I think, if the game is purposely too hard on a certain song. Like she'll just straight up say like, guys, I don't know this song. I can't play this song. They're like, whatever, just do your best. Yeah. The mini game itself is fine. It's a little clunky, but I just love rhythm mini games for the most part. Like it takes like a really bad one for me to not just love it out of sheer nostalgia for Guitar Hero, I guess. But I like the songs in here too. Like I think Die Anywhere Else is probably my favorite one. And that parts of that melody get reused in some of the other songs throughout the game, which I think is really nice too. Like a really prominent kind of part of the song. I don't have the vocabulary. You do though. The do, you hear that in like the song in May's house, I think.
Oh yeah.
So it's kind of cool the way they connect those two things. And, that's the song in May's house, and it has a part sharing with a song called Die Anywhere Else. So maybe that helps to show how people may feel about Possum Springs a little bit.
Yeah, certainly so. I imagine all of them. I mean, even Angus probably feels that way.
Yeah.
Certainly B and Greg do as well. There are, if you search these on YouTube, you can find real covers of people doing this.
Mm-hmm.
And have you listened to these at all?
I have not. No.
I really don't like them. I don't. There's something about, so when you do this band practice, Angus is the singer, and it's, the voice is represented by MIDI, right? It's like a sound patch. It sounds kind of like a synth, like a soft synth. And there's lyrics, like you can read the lyrics as you're playing this. It's kind of difficult to do depending on the song, but you can. Something about putting it to real voice, it just feels wrong to me. Secondhand embarrassment, kind of like that kind of feeling. And it's not, I mean, sometimes it's because of the performer, but it's not always because of the performer. It's just like, I don't know. This is a tangent and has nothing to do with the game itself, but I was just curious to know if whether or not you checked these out.
No, I didn't. And I'm usually the, like, I love video game music, rock and metal guitar covers on YouTube guy, but I didn't think to look for these ones. I did listen to these songs and kind of think, like, the way that the melodies are, like the vocal melodies, they would kind of lend themselves sometimes to people singing them, but it's kind of hard for me to imagine words coming with those. The way some of the rhythms are and things like that. So I can see how they might sound a bit weird when you go listen to them. What did you think of the, walking around town music, which is much more chill for the most part?
Oh, I like it a lot. It reminds me of a mixture of the hazy vibes you get from Twin Peaks mixed with the aesthetic of a rainy Sunday afternoon. Mm-hmm. That's kind of what this soundtrack is to me. And Twin Peaks will make an appearance later on too.
Okay.
Put a pin in that. But it's a lot of, light percussion, maybe like some hand drumming, and very soft electric keyboard patches. Maybe a little bit of hi-hat here and there. It's very pleasant. It matches the aesthetic of the game, especially the day that it gets overcast. I think there's like one day where it's like gray. Mm-hmm. It matches that perfectly.
Yeah, I think the song on the soundtrack that is actually titled Possum Springs has this like pretty optimistic melody to it as you're rolling around town. Once you get to the next screen away from May's house, it starts up, and that song's also memorable because John from Gaming in the Wild uses that in his podcasts. So when that song started playing, I was like, oh shit, Gaming in the Wild time. So shout out to John. It's a good show he runs. But it does match like the mood of it. Whether May is walking out of the house hungover after going to a party the night before, or whether some crazy shit has gone down in the story and you're still going out and doing your little visits around town, that background music is just there to kind of give you a mood, I think. But it is really pretty. I like it a lot. There is one other thing about the music that I thought was really cool, and just to give a quick shout out to, at certain points in the story, May has dreams, and they are like playable dream sequences that you go through where you're going around and you need to find these 4 musicians one by one to kind of build out a song. And I thought this was really cool. Like, I like the songs, and I like the way that the things layer on top of each other as you find the musicians. I didn't love like doing these sections as a thing that I'm doing in the game, but like, I thought the music was good enough. And I was like, legitimately, I was like, oh, cool. I found a tuba player. Like, there's going to be a tuba going into this song now. Cool to see that. So just a shout out as like one kind of cool musical choice that they did in here.
Yeah, and it's interesting instrumentation as well. I think it's tuba, baritone, saxophone, accordion, and violin. Mm-hmm. And I think there's like percussion in there as well, but you don't have to find them. It's really neat. The dream sequences aside, the music is very, very cool. And I do like that you get to build it out. That's it's a nice touch.
Yeah. So like, as far as presentation goes, I think that this game has a pretty unique approach to, art and music definitely, with those rock songs and stuff. But, the art style is very unique to this game. I think I haven't seen a whole lot else like it. And, presentation wise, I think that this game is just really pleasant overall.
Yeah, agreed wholeheartedly.
All right, let's take our final non-spoiler music break. When we come back, we will talk about our final thoughts about Night in the Woods, our recommendations, and a little bit of housekeeping before we can finally let loose and get into spoiler time. All right, so in the last section here, as we always do, we give kind of wrap-up thoughts if we have anything that we haven't already said, but also answer the question, who would you recommend play Night in the Woods?
I mean, I would generally feel comfortable recommending this to most people. There are those that do not like to read a lot in their games, and they need to, have very gameplay forward video games, let's say. I think those folks that fall into that camp might not like this as much, but I would still recommend it to most people. Whether they're in it because they like, quote unquote cozy aesthetic, whatever that means anymore, or whether they, like the thematic ideas that this deals with, the generational poverty, homecoming, what it means to find family, things like that. I would feel comfortable recommending this to most people. Maybe, I suppose with that caveat, there's a lot of reading. Yeah,
I think most people who are going to listen to this podcast and come back and listen to many episodes in a row, or find this, Night in the Woods as your first episode of this show, you're probably down for some reading. So with that obvious caveat that this is not an action game, there's one knife fighting mini game that you might end up doing. But as other than that, there's not a whole lot else as far as that goes. I would recommend it, like you said, to basically everybody who thinks that what this game is doing sounds interesting. If you've listened up till this point, you've heard us talk about the thematic material that the game is tackling and showcasing. And I think that's really where the bread and butter is. And it's done really, really well, in my opinion. So almost no hesitation, recommended to anyone who thinks they might like it or might want to check it out. And you might already own it.
It's true. It's free on PS Plus, PlayStation Plus right now. I don't remember what tier that's supposed to be, but you can do it there. And even still, the game at full price is like, what, $20? So it's not too bad. 20 bones. That's, it's affordable. This game feels very slice of life in some sections to me. It's not, the point of it is not to drive the plot forward. The point is to exist in this world that they have created. Yeah. And that is its own reward. I think they do it really well. Some people might not agree. If you really, if you're the kind that loves to move the plot forward and there's always something going on, maybe not. But yeah, terrific. Recommend 10 out of 10. And if you listen to, like you said, Dave, if you're listening to this show and you're listening to every single episode in the catalog, downloading it, listening twice to boost the numbers, subscribing to Dave's Patreon and jumping into the Discord, like all of you do, then, you'll like this game.
Yeah, absolutely. The slice of life angle is really interesting too, because what that does is it allows you to, like you said, exist in this world, get to know the people that inhabit this world, maybe not deepen, but learn more about the relationships between the characters so that when the plot actually does kick off, and it does, there are things that happen for sure. When that does kick off, you have established relationships with characters and other people around town, like your main friend group and the other people around town, so that you have, stakes to what's actually going on, which, I'm up for that slice of life stuff because they do it really well. And then when the plot kicks off, I think that that's really interesting also. So we will, again, save that stuff for very soon. Spoilers are coming soon. But before spoiler time, we have a little bit of housekeeping to do. So We always start with the guest to talk about the things that they make. And like I said at the top, Rick is the host of Pixel Project Radio, one of the most frequent guests on this podcast. And I've also been on Pixel Project Radio several times. So, Rick, if you can, please tell the people what is Pixel Project Radio and where can people find you?
Of course, yeah. If you're a fan of Tales from the Backlog, I think you will be a fan of Pixel Project Radio as well. You can find it really wherever you get your podcasts, and it's dedicated to doing critical analyses on different games. As at the time of this recording, we just finished up a month of 2 games. We did 2 episodes on 1000 Times Resist, on which Dave was a guest, along with Matt Stormageddon, and we just finished and published today the final episode for an analysis on Pentiment. The show recently just came back from a hiatus, and I'm sort of restructuring things on how I want them to be moving forward, and we're doing a great job at this point. I think it's in a good spot. But if you are interested in analysis of games from a story perspective, from a mechanics perspective, music perspective, feel free to check it out. We have a Night in the Woods episode, which you can check out after you're finished listening to this one. I just re-listened to it. It holds up perfectly well. Dave, as Dave said, has been on many, many times talking about games such as 1000 Times Resist, Nier Replicant, Chrono Trigger. I completely forgot you were on Chrono Trigger. I was just reminded the other day.
I was there.
Whoa. He was there in time. But yeah, those are a good few places to check out. Yeah. Check the show out. Like I said, if you like this show, Tales from the Backlog, you'll probably like Pixel Project Radio, maybe, probably. And we would love to have you if you are willing to listen.
Yeah, definitely has my recommendation for people to check out. Again, we're doing a lot of the same stuff as on PPR as we do on Tales from the Backlog, but Pixel Project Radio does the beat-by-beat plot analysis and then stopping along the way to discuss what themes are brought up, what character motivations are being showcased, and things like that along the way. And that's something I don't do here. So that's something that's always fun to go on PPR and kind of get into that like zoomed in level of detail on what's going on in the stories. So same like type level of conversation, we'll say a lot of times, but a different approach to it, which is always good.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I find a lot of value in doing a sort of beat-by-beat approach for folks that aren't interested in playing a game and just kind of want to know about it.
Yeah.
Or folks that have already played it and want to rediscover something new going through it a second time. It's a lot harder to do that with video games than it is with a book or, a piece of music or something like that. You could listen to an album 5 times in one day. With a game that's, even a short game like 10 to 12 hours, that's still 10 to 12 hours. That's a lot of time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a lot. But the dedication to the craft is there. Anyone who goes to PPR to listen is going to hear that. So again, it has the highest recommendation from me, and I will put all the relevant links down in the show description so that you can find it. While I'm talking about myself over the next minute or so, go find some episodes of PPR to download. I think you will really enjoy it. So for Tales from the Backlog, I would really appreciate ratings and reviews. If you really enjoyed this episode, if you've been listening and haven't done it yet, that's a big way to help people find the show so that when they search for a podcast about Night in the Woods, they might find this one, which I think is going to be, that's what we want. You can also join the Discord server and join the conversation about Night in the Woods this week and other games that you're playing, other media, share pictures of your pets, stuff like that. We have a great community in there. There's an invite link down in the show notes. And you can listen to my other show. It is called A Top 3 Podcast. We do top 3 lists and we draft topics. We recast movies with funny actors. It is a comedy show. I think it's a good time. And last but not least, if you would like to support the show monetarily, you can do that at patreon.com/realdavejackson. And everyone who joins on the Patreon can vote in polls for games I do on the show. You'll get some bonus episodes every now and then. There's other treats in there as well, but I don't want to spend too much time talking about this. Ready to get into spoilers. So with that said, Rick and I are going to take a break. We're going to listen to some music. When we come back, It's going to be full spoiler time for Night in the Woods. All right, before we get to spoilers, we have the customary thank yous to do. So a big shout out to these fine folks who support the show over on Patreon. Thank you to Chris Nelson, the Top 3 Podcast crew, Chris Copleen, Eric Guess, Rick Firestone, Nick Fakori, Jill, Jeff, formerly Jerf, Kieran, Soccer, Cupcake, Kyle, Christian S., Matt aka Stormageddon, JD, Doug Leaf, Jason Emery, Brian Skirsha, Randall, Jake Martin, Jenny E., Marcus O'Neill, and many more. If you'd like to be like those fine folks, once again, that's patreon.com/RealDaveJackson, where in exchange for a few bucks a month, you'll get a lot of treats. With that being said, it's time to come back for full spoilers for Night in the Woods. All right, we're back. It's full spoiler time for Night in the Woods, and it has the customary warning that I always give. This is not a chronological walk through the story, so we may spoil things that happen at the end of the game in the next, minute. So if you don't want to be spoiled, please go play Night in the Woods. It's really good. And come back, save this spoiler section for later. Rick and I will be patiently waiting here, not talking, just waiting for you to come back.
That's right. As soon as you pause this episode, we cease to exist.
That's right. So, I wanted to start the spoiler section by just talking about relationships with May's friends, because this is what you do early in the game: is you learn about these relationships, you advance them in certain ways. You said that you hung out with Greg your first time and B your second time.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Can you kind of tell me a little bit about what happens with Greg? Because I hung out with Greg one time. I did the thing where you steal the robot, you give it to Angus, you get to build it in the kitchen. You have to go steal a car battery. That's the other thing I did with Greg. But I didn't do the thing where you steal the robot, and then I didn't do anything else with Greg the rest of the game.
What I love about Greg's relationship with May is that, well, it feels very real to me because I'm viewing this through my own lens of experience, through my own bias, as we view everything in this life through our own biases. I had a friendship that was explicitly like this. May and Greg bring out the absolute worst in each other.
Yes.
And this is a plot point too, because Greg's boyfriend Angus notices this, and this is causing friction in their relationship. But when the two of them are back together, Greg and May, they revert into this comfortable partnership that they've had all their life. And some criticisms that I've heard of this is like, well, I think actually May is just a bad friend. It doesn't show her actively encouraging Greg to do this. But I think that misses the point a little bit. This relationship that they have is so ingrained that there doesn't need to be active encouragement. Them being together is the encouragement. It's something that I think a lot of us have experienced when we come home to our hometown and see a childhood friend, and we immediately kind of revert back into that relationship, whether it's through a nickname or whether it's through an inside joke, an old inside joke or whatever. Greg and May bring out the worst in each other. They do these crimes and they generally act like hooligans. And that bothers Angus a lot because it's causing friction in their relation. They want to settle down. Mm-hmm. They want to have a loving dyad of a family. And that's difficult when Greg is encouraging May to destroy shit and break into the abandoned food donkey. What's really beautiful about this too, and there's a lot that I'm probably missing, but there is one really heartfelt hangout where Greg discloses that, it's strongly implied that he has bipolar disorder. Yeah. Where he has really high highs and really low lows. And, he talks about his past and everything. And he explains that he wants to get out of Possum Springs as much as any of us. He relates to this story that this childhood experience where he saw this group of sheep break out of a fence and run across the highway, and some didn't make it, some got hit, but one did, and he said, "I want to be that sheep."
Mm-hmm.
And the problem is that this generational poverty that is stricken the whole town, they can't afford to move out, and they're really saving, they're really trying, but it's so difficult because it seems like everything is working against them, and it is. It's a really, I know that's kind of it's a combination of being a large overview and also not entirely focused because this is all off of the dome, but it's a really beautiful series of hangouts. And while these are also beautiful in a different way, I really, really appreciated this because I know how it feels to want to get out of a place, but you just can't, and how it feels to have your brain working against you because of biological imbalances that are causing you to behave and think a certain way. Mm-hmm. It's all, and of course, having a friend that brings out the absolute worst in you, but how do you tangle with that without destroying the friendship? It's very well realized. I have a lot of respect for what they did here.
Yeah, and it was kind of surprising to me to listen to podcasts and read after the fact that this is the direction that Greg's Hangouts went in, because I did the first one, maybe not the first one, maybe the second one, whatever. The one where you steal the car battery is really early in the game, and that's just pure mischief. And after that, I did one with B, and it was much more interesting. So I was like, okay, I'm going to hang out with B, not because I don't like Greg, but because I'm more interested in the dynamic and the relationship between B and May. So to find out that Greg does have this, thoughtful side to him that's just not on display all the time. Kind of like you said, because when he's with May, that's not the vibe most of the time. They're just, they're pranksters. They're having fun. They're breaking shit, doing crimes, as they say. And you're right. Maybe it's the bringing out the worst in each other. Maybe it's not that you go back home and you see somebody who you used to steal shit with, and then you're like, okay, well, let's go steal stuff. Let's go have a good time like we used to do. Maybe it's just this is someone who you drink too much with when you hang out with, or someone who, maybe you just don't get into those deep conversations all the time. And it takes a really special circumstance for it to come out. So that is really real. I agree.
And two, we can also think of it this way. Why would they be reverting to this way? It's because there's so much friction in their lives, that reverting to a place of safety, almost to reverting to a place of childhood safety, mm-hmm. becomes a sort of coping mechanism. Obviously, May has a lot going on. Which we learn about through the game about why she dropped out of college. And Angus and Greg are, they are in a queer relationship in a very small town. There's no direct implications that they're getting harassed or anything, but one can imagine. And even outside of that, they're fruitlessly trying to save up to get out of here, to die anywhere else.
Yeah.
And the system makes that incredibly difficult. So reverting to this childhood safety net is almost a form of therapy for the two of them. Mm-hmm. Destructive therapy that hurts others, but therapy nonetheless.
Yeah, I agree. And they're saving up. They say they've been saving up for a long time, and it's going to take a while longer. Greg works at the mini mart and Angus works at the video store. They are not working high paying jobs where they probably have disposable income to just leave town whenever they feel like it. They have to plan long term. And another thing I learned about this after the fact, it came up, I think, in a conversation with B, but not from Greg. And I heard that it comes up with Greg, is that Greg thinks Angus is too good for him, and that this relationship is kind of doomed because of that. And maybe he was thinking about it before. Maybe May coming back and Greg, breaking light bulbs behind the store is making him think about this more. I'm not sure. But B agrees with this, that their relationship's not going to last, and it's just because they're too different, in her opinion.
Yeah, I forget where this conversation takes place, but at one point, and I forget who says it, I think it's B, but she'll say something to the effect of like, once they move out of here, Angus will realize that he can do better. And it ties into one of B's big hangout themes of proximity. And whether or not, this is something that I think the game is asking the player to consider, whether or not proximity matters in terms of all of this, which, I mean, I'll leave it up to you. We can either talk about that now or wait until we get more into B, but it's looked at through a different angle with this relationship with Angus and Greg and May. And I mean, again, that's not something that I've seen a game ever tackle before. I'm sure they probably have, but it's done so well here.
It is done really well. And do you know, like offhand, like roughly the population of Possum Springs? Do they ever say it in the game?
That's a great question. No.
It's like a small town. Like, I consider myself to be from a pretty small town, but it's a population of 25,000 in my hometown, which is like small-ish, but like we have a Chipotle and shit like that. So like we're not super small.
I can draw a comparison to my hometown if you'd like.
Sure.
Because it is this. It's a 2-stoplight town.
Yeah.
And according to the 2022 census, there were 4,357 people.
Okay. So where I was going with that is we all have friendships by proximity when we're little kids. The kids on your street, the kids on the school bus, the kids in your class, things like that. And then once you're not on the same street or in the same class, a lot of those friendships go away, even when you're little kids. Now we have, older people with more means to drive out to another city to hang out with other people like B does in the one, party hangout that you do, or shown through, dating, I suppose, from friends of mine that are, in the dating scene in my hometown. It's a small group of people, and proximity definitely does play into it. And you got to think that finding a gay relationship in Possum Springs is not easy either. So the proximity effect there has to be even stronger. So I don't think it's necessarily wrong that B assumes that this is what's going to happen when they move out. And Greg, to some degree, I think Greg agrees with it too. But the way that proximity plays into who we hang out with is super true in small towns. And I think it probably gets stronger as you get older in a smaller town. If you just stay there for a while, you become comfortable with the people that you hang out with, the people that are around. And if you're stuck there, if you have no means to move out or go to college, like a lot of the characters in Night in the Woods, we get this through B, like, that's her like dream is to go to college, but she can't. So she's stuck there with the other people that are there. I'm rambling, but the proximity, I'm mixing B and Greg's storylines because they're both dealing with this in a really strong way.
It's interesting that it seemed like for a minute you were going to take a more pessimistic approach to this idea of proximity, like locking into the idea that, once Angus and Greg move to the city, maybe Angus will realize that he is better than Greg. Whatever that means. And that's a valid read. I apologize. I didn't mean to interrupt you, Dave.
No, it's all right. Like he may realize that because in a lot of ways, Angus is presented as a lot more like together, more mature in a lot of ways, I guess. And if that's something that he values in a partner, but he can't find around here, and like Greg and Angus love each other, that's clear in the game. But if that is something that he really values and he sees that there are other options, I guess, or gets dissatisfied with Greg when they move to a new place, like it's certainly a possibility. I just think that that proximity effect, now that we're talking about it, in a small town with a small pool of people to choose to hang out with and an even smaller pool of people that you're compatible with, like I think that this is really strong.
I think that there is a more positive way to look at it and a more neutral way. Mm-hmm. So if we're going on a positive stint here, a more positive spin, one could say proximity matters because we're both here. We both have to deal with this small town, and we didn't ask to be here, but we are, and together we can get through this. We can use this proximity as a way to say, I understand, I know where you're coming from, and we could do this together. Mm-hmm. I think there's also a more neutral read of this based on the game's general voice and thought process behind the universe. Many times throughout here, there are, I want to choose the words carefully. It is strongly, not even implied, it's said that the universe doesn't care.
Yeah.
The universe doesn't care, it's the people that do, is misquoting Angus. And I think proximity matters there because, I mean, this is all random. But it's not about that. This is the absurd random nature of the universe, where we're putting up, where we've got our intent that is being put directly beside this irrationality of the universe. Proximity matters because, yeah, it's all random, but now what do we do with that? Mm-hmm. Sure, at the end of everything, we have to hold on to something.
Yeah, if the universe is random and uncaring, which is, I'm on board with that as a way of viewing certain things in the world, then what can you control? You can control who you hang out with and things, but in a place like Possum Springs, if it is as small as it seems, like your degree of control is much lower. So you may, like, that's where I'm kind of going with this. It's not like a pessimistic thing that like Greg and Angus are for sure doomed, but the fact that they are probably two of a very small number of gay men in the town would lead to them at least knowing each other. And, proximity can breed attraction. Opposites can also attract for some people. I think that quote from Angus may give a window into why he loves Greg, because he loves Greg. It's not like he's just like, yeah, well, I'm with him because he's the only one. But, probability and, small statistics and a small group of people aside, it's clear that he loves Greg, and his kind of view that you get in his hangout where he says, I believe in a universe that doesn't care and people who do. Maybe that's why he is attracted to Greg, because he can tell that Greg cares and Greg loves him, and they are good for each other in certain ways too. It's just interesting because we don't really get to see them together that much. We get to see them, but May's like this wrench in the gears for their relationship.
Yeah, she's not the glue. That's explicitly said at a certain point. She's not the glue that's holding that friend group together. That's actually Angus, according to B.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of proximity, then let's talk about B's, because B is a different type of character. So like May and Greg enable each other in their relationship to kind of go back to this more childlike state of mind and, let's go do crimes and break stuff and have fun like we used to. And in my experience, because I did most of B's hangouts, B is a reality check for May. And May, when she comes back from college, is super naive, I think, to the things that people in town have been living, the way they've been living, the realities of their life. And she seems super idealistic about like the way people should handle their situations. And this comes out when she's hanging out with B. And a lot of the times when B talks about like struggles with the situation that she's in, May's response is to, throw all that shit aside, do what's best for you. And B is the reality check where she says, I can't just do that. Like, that's not how things work. And this was my favorite part about their relationship. The fact that she serves as that, like, hey, this is how things are for us in the real world over here.
Yeah. May went off to college and didn't, or how was it phrased? We had to stay here and grow up while you went off to college and stayed the same.
Yeah.
May is a product of her environment as much as she is a product of her genetics. And that's the nature versus nurture thing can come up here in that way. She gets to be idealistic and see the world through the fiery eyes of a go-getter and of a dreamer, because she's never had to deal with these crushing realities that B is currently dealing with. For example, she had the privilege, and in a small town, this is a great privilege of going off to college.
Yeah.
Of B never got that. She is literally, I think May is literally living B's dream. And like you said, she chooses to throw it away. From B's perspective, she chooses to throw it away.
Yeah.
Now, B does not have the full perspective, and eventually she does get it if you hang out with May enough, or if you hang out with B enough. So they are both approaching this in a way where neither of them are communicating as effectively as they could be. But I can absolutely see where both of them are coming from. But it leads, like you said, to this hard check into May's life that perhaps May doesn't always have the answers. Perhaps it's not as simple as saying, well, just do it better. Like, you don't deserve this.
Yeah.
No, I don't deserve this, but I don't have any other options.
Yeah. I think these hangouts are where like part of my view that May is not a great friend comes from. And I think it's where a lot of people become dissatisfied with what seems like choices. You know, like you often have choices of what to say in a conversation. But in a lot of these conversations with B, you'll look at the options and be like, these are all shitty things to say. I don't want to say any of these things. But that's like, you're not an avatar deciding who May is. You're playing as May, as she is. So the fact that she's going to just say the most tone deaf shit you've ever heard in some of these conversations with B, that's May. That's who she is. And that's her worldview. And this is why I have such respect for the writing of May, because they're not afraid to let you not like her during conversations and be like, May, what the fuck is wrong with you? Why would you say that?
Yeah. I never understood those criticisms. May is not a silent protagonist. This isn't Persona or Chrono Trigger. Like, you are playing as May. You're not playing as Dave playing May.
Yeah. You're playing as her with her worldview and just how naive it is, you know, especially at the beginning. So
that's a good word to describe it, is naive, because May, you know, I still maintain that May is not a bad person, and she's not a bad friend. She's just acting like a bad friend in that moment. And it's because of her naivety. She doesn't want to be a bad friend, and she's not a bad person at heart, but because of her surroundings and the privileges she's had, she and the events that B has experienced that May hasn't had, she doesn't think of it that way. She doesn't have that perspective, and here she is getting it. So she will presumably move forward with a better worldview. Yes, in these moments, she is acting like a bad friend, but it's very clear that it's coming from a place of wanting nothing but the best for B. She knows how smart B is and how capable she is, and she's running the entire store by herself because her dad is mentally broken from the death of their mother. And she's like, B, you deserve so much better than this. You are so smart and capable and badass. But somebody like May telling B this, somebody that threw away her dream, coming back and saying, you shouldn't be doing this, that is what pisses B off. And understandably so. It's totally understandable that B flips the fuck out on May as many times as she does. It's a very real friendship. It's very messy. There is no clear, like, black and white. You are wrong and this person is right. It's just these frictions exist in real life friendships, and it's difficult.
Yeah. So I think that in the state that May is in like the early portion of this game, while the focus is on these relationships, I do think that she is a bad friend. Like, you're right. There is a want to support and uplift B, but she is just not listening to what B is saying, and she's forcing her worldview out there. And the result is she's not a supportive friend. So, like, I think that there's a difference between her, like, wishing harm on people being a bad friend, which is not what's happening. But there's also, like, you know, the results of the way that she approaches these situations with B, and, you know, maybe to a much lesser degree, the way that she's enabling Greg's worst tendencies. the result is that she is a pretty bad friend in here. She coerces B to steal something in one of those things when B tells her like, hey, I don't want to steal shit here. So like, I agree with a lot of what you're saying, but I think I have like a little more critical view of how May goes about things and the results of what she does. And, you know, maybe if it weren't for that proximity, B would have told May to fuck off and never talk to her again after a couple of these hangouts, instead of just being like, well, you're what I got. You know, they go out to that, May invites herself to that college party, and, you know, we have another time where B freaks the fuck out with good reason at May in there. So I think that we're like mostly on the same page. I just do view her a little bit more critically during this.
Yeah, I absolutely understand that. I don't think that I would never say that your read on this is poor. You did there's only one thing that I want to respond to.
Sure.
I'm not trying to hold us up, but you had said that May isn't listening to B. My counter to that would be, I don't think either of them do a good job of listening to each other at all. The only time they truly express how they're feeling and why they are so upset is when they're freaking out on each other.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
B will explicitly ask, hey, why did you come back from college? And May says, I'm not talking about that right now. Okay. Yeah. Understandable, because that's a pretty heavy topic for like the first conversation back, but still, she's not expressing herself. When does B express herself to May? Whenever B is yelling at her. Neither of them are expressing themselves as healthily as they could to make this friendship have less friction. But here's the thing. That's just how it goes.
Yeah, I was just going to say
that's how it be.
They're 20 years old. They don't have as much emotional, you know, intelligence and empathy as I would like to think the two of us do at our advanced age.
Advanced ages of early to mid 30s.
Yeah.
Oh, that's gonna, if you have any 40 plus listeners, that's gonna give them a good chuckle.
Good. I hope it does. So the one thing I would like kind of disagree with is that B does say what's going on in her life. And May keeps it all locked up. B lets May know, like, oh, you forgot that my mom died. Like, that's what's been going on. Here's what's going on with my dad. We have this possible sexual predator working at our store, but we can't fire him because he's the only person who can do this job. And this is what I'm dealing with. And May like doesn't internalize like the realities of those situations, but B does say what's going on.
Well, with the exception of the mom thing, which I am not going to argue against. May just straight up forgot. That sucks.
Yeah.
Like, she doesn't tell May that until they're having that fight in her room about the potential sexual predator at work. And you could say, well, why would she have told her about that beforehand? Yeah, maybe, I don't know. But that's the first time that comes up. Like, they're working through it in a very messy way. They ultimately do communicate with each other, but like exactly like you said, they're 20-somethings. Yeah.
It takes 3 big fights before they actually get there. And I really like that scene when they go to the party. You know, May goes on this big thing about, you know, all the elite college kids. And I was like, the irony of May doing that in front of B.
Yeah.
Or doing that at all. You know, anyone who goes to college and then goes on a rant about elite college kids, like, okay, all right. Very nice of you to say that. But that's when B gives the whole speech about like how you're basically living my dream. You threw it away. She goes out there. B goes out to this college town to party and to feel normal. That's what she says. This is the only time when she feels like she gets to live a normal life. And when May fucks that up, then they have like their last fight. And the last fight where they, you know, B talks about that. May talks a little bit about her situation. I just really like that scene. I like all of these though. That's why I kept hanging out with B. I loved, like, I didn't love seeing them fight, but I loved the way that this is all presented. Like the way that it's written and everything is so good.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's very true to life. That whole college party it's so good. It's probably the best hangout that you get to do with B, at least I think. May is the worst wingman possible.
Oh, yeah.
Just truly, truly awful.
So that's Greg and B. Did you hang out with Angus?
I did. I make it a point to hang out with Angus anytime.
Okay. So we already kind of touched on like the topics of or like Angus's worldview, I guess, and what I think we can blow up into a philosophy or belief system of this game in general, you know, and May kind of echoes this a little bit later, I think, with one of her realizations. But I believe in a universe that doesn't care, and people who do, is the result of a really traumatic upbringing for Angus. And it's really interesting that they just keep that locked away for a while. And Angus is this cool, put together dude. He's like, you know, almost a foil for Greg. They're like a comedy duo. Like Angus is the straight man and Greg's the wild guy. And then when you finally do get to talk to Angus, you see like, oh yeah, he's been through some shit too. And it leads to this, I don't know, it feels like a thesis kind of worldview from him.
It's so heartbreakingly tragic.
Yeah.
Hearing about what Angus had to go through and ultimately what led him into believing in his philosophy that there simply can't be a God. This game handles religion in a very interesting way. And it's never on the front street. Like that's not the point of this game. It's not that kind of game. But between Angus and another character, Pastor K, especially Pastor K and May's interactions with each other, it talks about religion in a very fascinating way. I think that this idea that Angus is gelling with, I believe in a universe that doesn't care and people who do, that worldview of this universe is ultimately kind of supported by, like you said, May's interactions in a future scene that we're going to get to. And it's part of why I think the ending is really, really good. I'm obviously, I think we can hold off on that for a little bit, but it's this philosophy that, you know, the universe is uncaring, irrational, you know, going back to that idea of absurd, intent versus the irrationality of the universe. You have to hold on to something to ground you.
Yeah.
You know, we can talk about that tagline at the end of everything, hold on to anything. What is that saying? It's saying that at the end of the day, at the end of that chapter of your life, at the end of your life in general, you have to have something that gives you hope, that gives you power, that gives you grounding. And in some ways it doesn't matter what that is, but you need that to navigate through this life.
Yeah, agreed. I'm thinking about the ending now. And now you've got me curious about what about the ending was it that we are going to disagree about? Is it something related to the monster and the cult, or is it related to the ending with May and the characters?
It is, I don't know if you are going to cut this out or not, but it is your point that says May is not coming out of this story resolved. Her and her friends blow off processing what happened, etc.
Yeah. Okay. So that's not too far off subject with, you know, the kind of philosophy and realizations that we had. Like I said earlier, this is a coming of age story, but it's not that May saves the day and then she's ready to save the town and like become a hero or anything like that. She's just kind of like made a small step for herself and the way that she's going to view everything around, because her big issue was dissociation. And so like a lack of connection with everything around her. And now she has found a way to have that connection, basically. So what I mean by that is not that she's not coming out of this a better person, but that it's more subtle than like I used the Lion King as an example earlier. Like she comes out of this, she learned a little bit, she's turning a corner, but that's all it is. That's where the game leaves us. And it leaves us with room to wonder, like, what is May going to do next? How is she going to approach the world around her now? We have a little bit of like a new way to think of things, but I don't think it gives us a whole lot else.
It's difficult for me to talk about what I mean unless we also talk about the cult and that aspect of the story.
Sure.
but I see that is not next in your notes. So how would you like to proceed here?
Let's talk about how May gets here then. Let's talk about her mental health, and then we'll wrap back around to this. So
okay.
Part of the other part of the story is learning why May dropped out of college, what she had been going through before, and then this is where I think a lot of the great conversations with May's parents come into play too, when it involves why May dropped out of college, because she won't tell her parents either. They just know that she's back. She hasn't said why. So we learned that May went through these dissociative episodes where she describes things first in a video game, but then in real life losing meaning and turning into shapes, as she describes it. So just these nameless, faceless, lifeless shapes. And there was an incident where she had one of these and she attacked a kid. She beat him with a baseball bat. She did not get the help that would have helped her the most. Dr. Hank is apparently not a great psychologist in town, probably not qualified to be doing that. I think they mentioned that, but he's what they've got. So this is what's been going on with May. It just takes us a while to learn this. But I think that this being what brings her back to Possum Springs leaves her with nothing to grab onto for a while, right? This choosing dissociation as the struggle, we'll say, the mental struggle, leaves her with a lack of connection to everything else going on around her, which then gives her the chance to come to the realization, like you said, at the end of everything, hold on to anything. I forget the exact quote, but she basically says, I want to feel what's going on around, which is apparently not something that was going on. She says, I want it to hurt. That's her quote.
Right, because if it hurts, then she knows that she's feeling. She knows that she's alive.
Right, and which was not the case when it started, and then it started to happen again at college, and that's why she came back.
It's very perplexing to me whenever I see, and admittedly I don't see this too often, but in the past week I have, it's so strange for me to see people discussing this aspect of May and still coming away with she's just such a shitty character and a bad person. I really struggle to see how people don't see her as a sympathetic character, given that, while she did act as a bad friend, and I'm gonna keep phrasing it that way, acted as a bad friend, not was a bad friend, acted as a bad person, not was a bad person. While she acted in those ways, knowing the impetus behind it and why, I really struggle to know how some folks don't have any sympathy for her. I cannot imagine disassociating in this way. I've never had experience with that, and I can imagine it is terrifying.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes her decision to come back to retreat into the childhood, right? Retreat into the safety of the child forum, back into her hometown. It makes it so understandable.
Yeah, absolutely. And I may have, but the idea that May is a bad character is ridiculous to me. What you want out of a character is you don't have to like them. That's what I'm trying to say here. I'm trying to think of a way to express a character being unlikable doesn't make them a bad character. May would be a bad character if there was nothing to her, if she was very shallow, didn't grow, things like that. And there are static characters too. That's fine in certain situations. But May is none of those things. There's a lot to May. There's a lot that goes into the way she acts. And there's a lot of, there is growth that happens along the way in her personal relationships and in her own worldview and things like that too. So the idea that she's a bad character is insane to me. That's just if you come out of this thinking she's a badly written character, I just think you've missed a lot of what's going on here.
Yeah. Yeah. And the game is not subtle about what it's trying to say in that respect.
Yeah. So I think this is a good time. Let's talk about May with her parents, because I don't think I talked about them in the non-spoiler part. May's parents are two of my favorite characters in the game as well. Every morning starts with the opportunity to talk to May's mom. I say morning, I mean early afternoon. the opportunity to talk to May's mom in the kitchen before she goes to work. And every night ends with the opportunity to talk to May's dad and watch the shitty late night comedy that they're watching, which is funny. It reminded me of Terrence and Phillip in a way, like that type of show.
Yeah, that's a whopper.
A little bit less crude than Terrence and Phillip. But May's mom serves as kind of like another reality check character, because that's where you learn how May's naive kind of attitude clashes with the real world when you hang out with B. But then when you eventually get this out of May's mom, if you talk to her, you see how this affects her family, because you don't know until then everything that May's family sacrificed to get her to college. And then she's withholding the reason why she threw that away or gave it up, I suppose is a better way of saying it, until May's mom tells her very frankly, everything we sacrifice, we might lose our house because we paid for you to go to college.
What I love about this scene is, they don't characterize May's mom as being very overly righteous and an objectively good person in this moment. Mm-hmm. The way that she chooses to communicate this with May is incredibly passive aggressive. She's taking her stresses of adult life out onto May in that moment.
Yeah.
I think when, May will observe hey, you don't look so good today. Are you okay? And she's like, oh, just stress, numbers. I don't really have time to talk. And then she'll say, are you planning to tell me why you've come back to college? I'm just wondering why you're throwing away everything that we've done for you. Mm-hmm. And it's really passive aggressive in that moment. Yep. And it leads to this huge, huge fight that is just so upsetting to see how these two are speaking to each other. And it's very, very hurtful. And it ends with May saying, I'm just another in a long line of failures. You just want to see me succeed and you don't like to see me fail because I'm turning into you. Mm-hmm. And it's just such a powerful moment.
Yeah.
It's very messy. They do reconcile pretty quickly in the coming days.
Yeah.
Which is nice. But what a hard-hitting scene. It's just, you just want to yell at both of them. No, just listen to each other, both of you, for 1 second. Just listen. Mm-hmm. But they don't, because that's not how these relationships work.
Yeah. I like what breaks the dam, I think, in that conversation is how I think May's mom asks her, why did you come home again? And May says, it just wasn't where I'm supposed to be. And that really pissed her mom off.
Yeah.
I think she says something to the effect of, we might not be able to stay in our house for very long, and maybe it's not where we're supposed to be. Again, very passive aggressive. Yeah.
Yeah. Because in that moment, May is whoa, hold the phone, Mom. Let's stop this for a second. Yeah. What are you talking about? And she's like, well, it's just not where we're supposed to be. And it's why? Don't do that right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. It is really, really difficult. I don't want to, I'm not trying to dump onto your audience because this is your show and that seems uncouth to me, but I understand this all too well.
Yeah. I mean, I've had some pretty rough fights with my mom through times too. And so we have a good relationship overall, as May and her mom do, but these things can get ugly because depending on what the stressors are on both sides. It's not this exact same situation here, but it reminded me of some rough conversations that I've had where people maybe say things in certain ways that they don't mean or would not be the best way to say those things for mm-hmm. sure.
And it's really easy to see May's mom's perspective, right? Yeah. Especially, we're older now. We've been through college. We know college is exorbitantly expensive.
Yeah.
That's a whole nother topic, I'm sure. Mm-hmm. But it's so easy to understand where May's mom is coming from. At the same time, think about May's perspective too. They've been, as May's mom kind of passively aggressively says, they've been planning for this for her.
Yeah. The expectations.
Yeah, that expectation has been there since she was born. May didn't necessarily choose that. Mm-hmm. That was just a role being hoisted onto her. And now that she is developing from a kid into an adult, she's reckoning with that. Well, did I have autonomy? I'm not so sure. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not defending May and saying that she was 100% in the right. Nobody here is 100% right. Life is not that simple.
Yeah.
That's just facts. Deal with it. But I can understand where she's coming from just as much. I just, again, I want to just reach into the Steam Deck or the Legion Go or the PlayStation and shake them on the shoulders and say, just talk to each other, please.
Yeah. I just really like this. It's the way that it kind of lets us into realities in May's family as well. And this is an optional conversation. You don't have to talk to your mom.
Can you believe that?
Yeah. There are.
Yeah. Can you believe that? Yes. Okay.
Yeah. Not to no sell you again, but the fact that it's optional is kind of crazy to me, because without this, you would lose a lot of the context for what's going on in May's family. You get a conversation with her dad at the end of the game about like his perspective on this, but even his perspective doesn't let you in on the fact that like her family literally gave everything they had to get her to college. And like, if you look around the town, like I think it's presented in a way that like they live in the nicer part of Possum Springs, but even with that, they don't have disposable income to just send May to college or get a loan or something like that. Like, or maybe they did get a loan, and the fact that she's back means she has to pay, and that's going to fuck up their finances really badly. Like, as we know.
Well, that's part of why their house is in danger. Yeah. They took a loan out from a predatory loan company that preys on poor people with the expectation that they can't pay back the money, and then they get the house.
Predatory student loan company? Never.
Not even student loan, just predatory loan in general.
Oh, yeah.
I lived in Kansas City for a while, and there were payday loan providers like this on every corner.
Yeah.
It is one of the most unethical things in this country.
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, okay, so if it's not fucking Sally Mae or whoever Sally Mae is now, one of those, like you said, payday loan places with, double-digit % interest and shit like that, like that's...
And the fact that they know their business model is predicated on the fact that, yeah, these people probably aren't going to pay back, so we'll give them the loan that they won't get otherwise, so we can just make a profit off of them.
Yeah.
That is so scummy. That is below the dirt on my shoes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really shitty. Maybe I'd have forgotten that was the exact circumstance that is why their home is in danger. But that window into what's going on at May's house, and again, this is another wake-up call for May. Like, this isn't just going on in other people's lives. This is our life, too, at home, is really good. She needs that, I think. It was a really ugly fight that they had, which, fights with family can be like that sometimes. Nobody knows you better. So in her dad's perspective, too, not to ignore his perspective, I just really like the conversation at the end where you may have gone to the grocery store and seen him working at the deli counter there after his factory job went away. And he puts on a strong face. He goes to work. He does his job, but he is fucking miserable doing it. And he doesn't make enough money to, support the family. And his mom works at the church, and that's probably not enough money.
So I'm curious, when I first played this, you get extra dialogue with your dad if you got into the safe and found the contents in there. Mm-hmm. I didn't do it on this playthrough. I just forgot. But I remember saying the first time through that was my favorite scene in the entire game.
Yeah. I did get the tooth out of the safe, and that gets you a little bit of extra dialogue with her dad, where May gives her dad encouragement to unionize at work, which is good. But I could not find this quote, and I didn't want to scrub through a Let's Play to find it. But her dad freaks out at the end. He has a kind of a blow up, not at May, but just at the situation, where it's kind of like Selmers' poem, where he says, folks are supposed to be able to work a job and support their family. They're supposed to be able to buy a house. They're supposed to be able to live like this. And we can't, because they pay us like shit. Our job is, not valued. We're not valued. And then if you find the tooth, May can give him a little push to go unionize after that. So I love that scene too.
Yeah, it's really good. I don't know that I would say the politics side of this is the game's thesis point necessarily, but I love what it does say. I mean, it's just true to life. We don't have to get into it, Dave. I know you feel the exact same.
Yeah. It's not that like this game has to make a big declarative statement politically about the situation the characters are in and what got them into this situation. They just show it to you, and they show the characters reacting to the way their lives are. And that's the statement. Like, you don't need the game to just a character to turn to the camera and tell you.
Yeah, exactly. It's showing the reality. And I mean, we're living it too.
Yeah.
We're living it too. I struggle to think of any of my friends that are just living alone because they have one good job. That is just not the reality anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's tough. This reality also extends to the rest of the people in town, and it extends into the way that this, I think, like a really misunderstood part of this game is, which is with the cult and the monster in the pit and what is going on with that. So up to this point, we have not mentioned one time that there is a kidnapping, ghost story going on in the game. You find an arm really early, like a severed arm in the street. And along the way, May's aunt, who's a cop, just kind of like warns May, like, hey, mind your own business. Don't go digging around where you shouldn't be. You're not going to like what you find. That only emboldens May because she's anti-authoritarian. But what's eventually revealed is that there is this cult in the town that is worshiping an eldritch monster in a pit, and they're literally sacrificing young people in town to this pit because they think when they do it, good things happen for the town. And so we take those situations that May's family is in, that B is in, and we expand it out to the whole town and how everybody else is dealing with the situation that they're in. The adults, the people who make decisions, the people who, have a little bit more power in town. This is what they're doing. They're feeding what they call, I think they say, the ones that don't matter, or maybe I'm taking that from I Think You Should Leave, where he's talking about the people that got hit by the car. Yeah, the cops said they just don't matter.
That's my favorite sketch on that show, and I can't find it anywhere online.
It's okay. The cops said those people are nothing. They don't matter. And that's kind of what's happening here with the people that are being sacrificed to this. So, quick question for you. Since the game does present this as there's a monster living in a pit that is eating the people and might be helping the town out, people believe that's what's happening. The people in the cult. Did you think that this is the reason why May started to have these dissociative episodes? The monster is reaching out to her?
Well, not the dissociative episodes, like with what happened on the softball field. From her dreams and headaches, yes.
Yeah,
but
okay.
I didn't think that it was necessarily the cause of, because if that were the case, then I don't really like that.
No, I didn't either. But
the game does such a good job of talking about mental health, and to chalk it all up to a cosmic horror, no, thank you.
I didn't think that was what was causing her initial issues, but it's definitely like the reason she's having these dreams about these god animals or whatever. So just wanted to get your take on that real quick. But yeah, just generally finding out that we have this kidnapping and murder spree around town, and that this is what it is. There's a cult, there's an eldritch monster, the young ones are being sacrificed. What's your take on this?
Okay, so here's what this is. And again, I don't think this is subtle. This cult represents this conservative idealism, this small town conservatism of wanting to maintain the glory days of the past and resist change. They say as much. They say we're just a couple of, I don't remember the exact quote, we're just a couple of old guys or old boys that want to do right by our own. And the people that they sacrifice are, like you said, the losers, the ne'er-do-wells, the ones that aren't going to go anywhere in life. The drifters,
Yeah.
the immigrants. I think they even call out like immigrants that are taking the jobs.
Yeah, the ones
Things
that
like
are holding us down, you know.
Right, exactly. Now, this was made in 2017, as we said, so viewing it through that lens is important because I think in 2024, using the cult analogy is a little tired. It's a little passé is not the right word, but it's been done. It's been expressed in that way. Yes, it's a cult. That's not that interesting. But so do I don't necessarily love the vehicle of an eldritch horror. I think the messaging is fine. It makes sense. I understand. This isn't the kind of game that sets out to be politically motivated as a primary attribute. It's part of the trappings, and there are more interesting conversations to be had about this, but it's not that kind of game. And I think if it tried to be, it would be unfocused and it would hurt the whole. That being said, it is pretty obviously a representation of small town conservatism and how it is a negative impact on pretty much everybody's way of life. One of the things that I am not really a big fan of with this is there are a few dialogue points where they meet this cult down in the mines and they are dressed in cloaks and masks, or cloaks and helmets. So they explicitly say, like, they're inviting May and her crew to be a part of this because they're getting older.
Yeah.
They need people to carry this tradition on to protect Possum Springs. And they're saying, we're not trying to kill you. Like, you're free to go now. Just, think about joining. But remember, you don't know who we are, but we know who you are. And then Greg echoes that sentiment a little bit later. He says, like, could be any one of them. I'm not the biggest fan of them representing this idea of anybody can be a conservative, and unless they're explicitly talking about it, you might not know. I don't love that. I think that is divisive in a way that's not helpful to anything. And I just want to say this now. I have faith in your listeners, but this might be a first time listen for somebody. If you're listening to this and you think you can pinpoint my politics or Dave's politics based on this snippet, you're wrong. You simply cannot. I am not defending conservatism. It's simple as. But I that's the one part of this that I wasn't a fan of. This idea that, like, we've got to be careful because anybody could be part of this cult of conservatism and we might not ever know. That felt a little weird to me. I don't like that. But what I do like about this is that is a major, major contributor to this generational poverty that is ultimately destroying these small towns. And this pervasive fear of the other, this pervasive fear of change, that I think is well represented and is part of why small towns like my own in real life are the way that they are. And it is not a boon. It is a soul-sucking virus that, in some ways a cult is too nice to paint it as in some ways. But I don't know. I'm getting a little bit unfocused here as I'm going on. So I want to give it back to you to save me. Save me, Dave. Save me from talking myself in circles.
No, I agree with I agree 100% with what your read of what this is. And, they stop short of saying, make Possum Springs great again, but it's not too hard to draw the parallel there. And the focus on, like, trying to recapture a past that you're looking at through rose-tinted glasses, I think is part of it too, or that they're looking at, not you personally. The people are looking back on the past of the town, the mining and then the factory where, people had jobs, but, like, there were fucking, like, union busters and stuff going around town. You go and you read in, like, those newspaper clippings throughout. There were disasters and people got hurt and there were riots. And it's not like this was this, like, old, amazing, prosperous past that they're trying to get back. They just view it as better than what we have now. And, they might make an argument that it was better in certain ways, but in some ways it absolutely was not better, which we can then parallel to the real world for anyone who wants to say, like, we should just be like America was in the 50s. And like, it was much better back then. You're like, was it? Was it really that much better back then?
Right. The people saying that and the people within this cult, it was better for them.
Yeah.
But it was not better for Greg and Angus. It was not better for May or B.
Exactly.
It was not better for people who aren't just like them.
Exactly. And that's like one of the things I liked about the way that they show, because this is a parallel to the real world where an older generation is fucking it up for the younger people, people who are trying to claw their way out of this. And you can imagine that if May and Greg and B, maybe not B, but May and Greg 100% could be a future sacrifice to this cult because they are not contributing to society in the way that these people think that they should be. Especially May, if she's having mental health struggles and she doesn't have a job and she's, bleeding everything dry or whatever they view of it.
Well, one of the cult members actively tries to make that happen at the end. Like the group says, no, we're not trying to kill any of you. But then as they're leaving, that one in the mining helmet comes back up the elevator and tries to take May.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I laughed because I just remembered that Greg like randomly had a crossbow when they went down in the mines. And it reminded me of Brick in Anchorman. Like he's got a grenade.
Brick, where did you get a grenade? I don't know. If you do the hangouts with Greg, it's you do a whole crossbow thing. He's like,
okay.
I got a crossbow. So yeah,
fair enough. It was a
Chekhov's crossbow.
There we go. Okay. So it was a very random thing. Like, Brick, where did you get a trident? So I killed a guy with a crossbow. I thought that was funny, but
what a great movie.
Oh yeah. I love how, like, I was thinking about this. Do I love that it's an eldritch monster in a pit that it's presented to, that they're feeding and that May talks to during a certain portion of this. So like in the game, they're presenting it as real, but it's more interesting to me if you think of it the way that Godzilla is used, where sure, Godzilla's a monster. He's busting buildings, grabbing airplanes out of the sky or whatever, breathing the nuclear laser or whatever the fuck it's called. But that's not what Godzilla like represents in a lot of those movies. Godzilla's there as a figurative monster just as much as a real one. And if you look at it through this, like just think of the Eldritch Pit as like, the pits of society that some of these characters could get shoved and kicked back down into every time they try to claw their way up. I think that works for me just fine. It was kind of strange to me that this turned into a fantasy story when it wasn't a fantasy story for a while. But then just thinking a little bit more like, okay, monsters represent things. It doesn't have to just be an eldritch pit. It doesn't have to be a Sarlacc pit. It can be a figurative thing.
Right. And, thinking back to this idea, the universe is indifferent. The universe does not care. It's not the monster's fault here. It is the actions of the cult and the people in the town that are directly responsible for everything. It's, and to the cult members, they would say, well, if we didn't do that, then the floods and the blizzard of 2010 and etc.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, okay, sure. But you still have to shoulder the blame for everything that's going on as you continue to want to keep things the same. Now, okay, so we talked about the cult now, so I want to jump back to what you had asked me before about the ending.
Yeah, let's do it.
Here's the reason why I love the ending. So there's a diegetic reason and there is a critical analysis reason. So let's do diegetic first. So, because it's quicker. When they finish the end, they get out of the mine, there's a cave-in. They kind of grapple with the fact, hey, we killed those guys. No, we didn't kill them. It was self-defense. We wouldn't have done it. And Angus is like, I would have done it. And that's like, hell yeah, Angus.
Fuck yeah.
But, they get out and ultimately the game ends with them coming to band practice. And it's like, do you want to talk about it? No, let's just play some songs and be done with it. And Angus will say like, okay, well, which song? And then the game ends. And I think actually now that I'm saying that, I think depending on whether you hanged out with Greg or B, I think the ending can be slightly different because I'm almost positive my ending was, I'm almost positive the last words from May were, what were we talking about again? And then it's credits. So I think but ultimately it's the same, right? They reconvene after this really traumatic week of events, 7 days of events. And when positioned to talk about it and think about it more and try and cope, they say not right now. And then credits. That's ultimately what happens. Diegetically, I think that makes all the sense in the world because they've just been, we've been playing this across a couple of weeks, an hour here, an hour there. They've been doing this for 7 days straight. This is just their entire life. So if they continue to talk about it, I think that would be very detrimental to their mental health. And I think it is another act of self-safety on their part to say, right now, I just need a sense of normalcy. We can talk about this in a little bit.
Yeah.
So from a critical analysis standpoint, think about what this cult represented. It represented conservatism and these small town ideals of wanting to keep things the same, living in the past. It wants the past to be the present. We don't need to change. The future is out there. Right here is now. In this town is now. And it always will be. And they are offered that position. The cult says, hey, join us. We want you to join us to keep the past present. And at the end of everything, what they do is not dwell on it. They don't want to dwell on what happened. They're not living in the past by thinking about these events. They're saying, right now, let's just move forward and play some songs. Mm-hmm. Right now, we're not going to just continually think backwards. For this moment, we choose to move on. And that's the theme of the game. It's not living in this past. It's not being defined by the cult of Possum Springs, by the disassociative event on the softball field, by how you've treated your mom. It's moving forward. And I think that is thematically completely appropriate. And, I don't agree with there are some takes where it's like, well, they didn't learn anything and it doesn't fit into this form that I learned in Literature 101. And it's like, yeah, no, it doesn't. Because that's not how art works. It's just not. I don't go trying to put square pegs into round holes. It doesn't work that way. I don't know. This ending probably could have gone a couple of different ways and been perfectly fine. But this way of them saying, no, right now we just need a sense of normalcy. We need to protect ourselves and we will move forward away from this idea of making the past present. And by moving forward, we are not making the past the present. We are making the present the present. I love it. I think it's great.
You can see that theme of moving forward and not dwelling on the past with a lot of characters too. You can see it with Angus, with the way his worldview is and how he doesn't focus on what's happened to him in the past. You can see it with May as she is kind of moving on, kind of like I phrased it earlier. She's turning a corner, I think, is the best way that I can describe it. And, other characters too, like her dad is moving on a path towards trying to unionize and make things better for the workers at his place of work. So I totally agree with your read on why the characters chose to just have band practice right there and how it reinforces that theme of what the cultists were doing was wrong to live in the past in this way. And then we see it character here, character there, character here. And then our friend group in the moment to just say, no, we need some time just to, play some music. And whomst among us has not had some real, heavy shit come up in our lives and just say not now. I watch a movie, play a game, take a walk and listen to some music. I will process this shit later. And that's what they do here. So yeah, I'm with you on that.
I think the only thing whenever I said at the very beginning that I didn't agree with this, I think what was coloring my perception was just the phrase, her friends, quote, blow off processing. That was the only real thing. I mean, I'm not going to come here and say, no, you're wrong. May is actually perfectly resolved, actually, because no, that would be totally antithetical to this game. Mm-hmm. I just don't view it as blowing off. That's really the only thing. So
yeah, just a word choice. They have the opportunity to talk through this and they just say, not now, which, depending on what words you pick, that's just what I meant there. Not that they're never going to think about this again or anything like that. And mm-hmm. I like how the game ends right here. Like I said earlier, I wanted more time at the end of the game, but I like the way that it ends basically. Like, I just think that once you learn that there's a cult and that there's a monster, and you go through that whole sequence and then you get to the end of the game, it's like, I don't know, an hour or less of gameplay. Like, I really think that section is too short, but I like what happens and where the characters end up and all of that. It's just, I could have used more time.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Hey, speaking of more time, do you know we haven't talked about the omniscient janitor?
I was just going to say, we haven't talked about that.
2 hours.
The one thing about the janitor that I did write down is that there is, like, I think this is an incredible quote from the end of the game where the janitor says, the big things don't teach you anything, but they make you something. And sometimes you have to wait a while to see what comes of it, which is kind of where this is the lens through which I'm viewing where May is at the end of the game. I don't see her as changed in a huge way. Like I said, she's turning a corner. We're not going to know the full effect and the full, changes that this experience and all of these conversations and learning about her friends and her family and all of that. We're not going to know all that stuff for a while. May's not going to see those changes for a while. In the moment, you just take it day by day, and then you'll look back on it in time and be like, okay, so that was how it changed me.
I love this quote too. I'm really glad that you wrote it down. And there are two avenues of thought that a lot of people go down. That there is no such thing as the present, because once the present is over, it is the past immediately. So there is no present, truly. Or conversely, everything is the present, right? Mm-hmm. Because we are never anything except living in the moment. And what I love about this quote is it reinforces this idea of moving forward, because things don't teach you anything, but they make you something. It's not saying that you learned something, so now it's time to retroactively and retrospectively reflect on what you've learned, backwards facing. It's saying you need to live in it and you need to move forward, and you will learn along the way. It's in total support of this thematic messaging, right? Yeah.
And this game doesn't end with the characters all having, the end of a South Park episode where Stan goes, guys, I learned something today.
Learned something today. Yeah.
This game doesn't end with that. And it would be stupid for it to end that way. I think that if you've been paying attention to what's been going on, you can kind of infer the direction that these characters are gonna move in, and like what at least the immediate future is going to be like for them. And the answer is, aside from the fact that, a dozen people died in town, and like, you go around town, you see one of the Smelters fan guys is missing. So you're like, oh, fuck, that guy was in there. May's aunt. I think May's aunt was in the cult. Maybe she wasn't there that night, but I think she was involved. Maybe we can talk about that. But the point is, the immediate future, I don't think, is going to be that different for these characters. B's going to go back to work. Greg's going to go back to work. Angus is going to go back to work. And May is going to, take some steps on the path of recovery and finding normalcy, whatever that means for her. But I love that this is how it ends in this kind of ambiguous way, but you already kind of know.
Yeah, it's not pretending, because if the game ended with the cult being destroyed and immediately everything got better, what kind of message is that sending, right?
All the flowers bloom in Possum Springs.
Yeah. And, it would diminish the entire. It would diminish everything. Quite honestly.
Yeah.
I don't like when endings of anything, any work of any kind, try to handhold you into like guiding you to the message. This is keeping things open because it wants, the job of works of art like this is to make the listener or reader, whatever, player, basket weaver, to make them think and reflect, right? Which, okay, yes, reflect. It's antithetical to the game's messaging. Ooh, we got you, Rick. Maybe. Okay, sure. but it's the purpose of these works is to make us have conversations like we're doing right now.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why they matter, because it's not about playing this game and saying, here's what Scott Benson and Bethany Hockenberry, I always forget her last name. It's not about here's what they think. It's about promoting this discussion and saying, is it the small town values that are causing this generational poverty? Let's talk about it and come to a conclusion together as people. It's terrific. I feel like I'm hogging the mic from you. I apologize.
No, you were on the podcast because I wanted to talk about Night in the Woods with you. So that's what we're doing. I agree with you. And the fact that the game just kind of leaves you to take your own interpretations here, and that it sparks such discussion around, means it's successful in, what it set out to do. I'm playing an RPG right now for the podcast that, like, it's a fun game, but it has absolutely nothing to spark a conversation. I'm not even going to do a spoiler section about it. There's nothing to it. And those types of games, like, you can get something from it, you can enjoy doing the combat or whatever, but it's not going to be nearly as interesting to do a podcast about. And that's the reason I'm doing the podcast, is because I want to have these conversations. I want to work through these thoughts. And, I've learned a lot about other ways to view this game through talking with you today and listening to other podcasts and reading discussions about it. And the fact that this game spins out all of these, like, complex discussions in so many directions means that it's, absolutely worth experiencing. If anyone's listening to this and you didn't play it, you just don't give a shit about spoilers and you're still here, like, play Night in the Woods, see what you take from it. See if you take something different from the two of us, because I think we largely agree on what the game is trying to say in certain cases, but there's different ways that we viewed, May's character and stuff like that along the way. That's the mark of good art. And that's, like, the type of game that I want to keep having conversations about on the show here.
Yeah, absolutely. There are, our interpretations say more about us than it does about really anything else, because as we said, you view everything through the bias of your own lens. There is nobody on earth is totally unbiased. We cannot be, and we shouldn't try to be. That's also why, like, this is, I'm sorry, this is a bit of a tangent. This is why, like, on the recent King of Games that we just recorded, it's like, don't try to be unbiased whenever you're reviewing a game. Don't try to be Mr. or Mrs. or person objective. It's boring. Lean into who you are. I want to hear why you like the game. Mm-hmm. And I think we did a good job of talking about it.
Oh, yeah.
I just want to say, like, this is a little bit totally to the side of what we're talking about. I did all of Lori's and Mr. Chazakov's quote unquote hangouts this time.
Okay.
And A+. I love both of those characters so much.
Okay. What did you like about them? Because I don't know who you're talking about.
Oh, okay. Mr. Chazakov is the Russian dude that is on the roof during the daytime looking at stars.
Okay. I did talk to him, but didn't know you could hang out.
Well, it's really just looking at stars. Like, that's the hangout. But you can do it multiple times.
Okay.
And he'll just, you look at the constellations, and there's some, like, lore about the constellations that kind of ties into the game. And he'll just pose these philosophical questions to May. And when she's like, I don't get it, he'll go, Behehe. Is Russian. That's really it. And then Lori is the little mouse that, like, is really into horror. And, she hangs out with May a little bit. I don't know. I liked them a lot.
Okay. Yeah, I missed both of those. The two other, like, minor optional things is I hung out with Ruki, who's very loud right now, but also I hung out with May's mom at the church when you can just kind of ditch work for an afternoon and go take a walk, which I thought was really good.
Oh, yeah.
Just kind of like viewing through May's lens. Anytime you learn something about your parent, you, like, I don't know, I feel like I know everything about my parents. That is completely false. And it's a, like, I don't know why you would think that. They had, full lives before you were born and probably didn't tell you. They're having full lives right now when you're not there. So May learns about her mom and, like, the history of the town and stuff like that a little bit. That was a fun hangout that I thought was nice. And then I did the storyline with the pastor and the homeless guy behind the church. And I really like that as something you mentioned earlier. This game's portrayal of religion and, like, the church, we'll say, as more so than, like, the church is amazing or the church is evil. It's like there's nuance in there.
I don't want to drag this out and talk all about that, but I loved those hangouts. Bruce is one of my favorite characters in this game. And one of the times where I thought May was at her most immature was when she was talking to Pastor K and they were talking about religion, because Pastor K says something very profound. She says, I don't know if there's a man up there, but that's not what religion is. Religion is about making things around you and the people around you doing right by them and being a source of positivity and light. and groundedness for the community. That's religion. And May is like, oh, so you're preaching every week and you don't even know, you don't believe in God. You're a phony. And it's like, Jesus Christ, May.
She's the college kid atheist on the lawn trying to convince people that God's not real.
Yeah. I've read, she's the Reddit, like I've read Richard Dawkins, and it's like, oh, come on. And I'm not, I'm comfortable enough to say that I'm not Christian myself, but I love religion. I think it's very fascinating, and May's views on it, oh, they're just so immature. And, you said you did the whole thing with Bruce. What I love about that is, and I think people miss this because I don't see this talked about. It's strongly implied that Bruce dies by suicide, and nobody talks about this.
Yeah, I'm not sure that that's what I took from it, but I took from it that he is turning down help because he doesn't want to be a burden on people. And I got the impression that he's going to die. It's going to be winter soon. He's going to die in the cold. That's what I thought.
True. If he's willingly succumbing to the elements, that is a form of suicide, I suppose. But the reason that I thought that is because May will ask him about his daughter at one point, because he says he has a daughter, and she's like, oh, where is she now? And he just won't answer. He spits dots. And then whenever he says, I'm going home, when he tells May to tell Pastor K I'm leaving, don't tell her until tomorrow, though. Not tonight.
Yep.
Once he's gone, she can tell him. He says, I'm going to be with my family. I'm so excited. They're going to be waiting for me there. Yeah. And then he says something too. He says, we'll all see each other again soon. And when you tell Pastor K, like, oh yeah, Bruce left, which by the way, May doesn't even tell her that Bruce said thank you. That was the one thing he asked, and she just didn't do it. Mm-hmm. Ugh, May. But whenever she tells Pastor K, like, oh yeah, he left yesterday, Pastor K just says ... and she's like, well, aren't you glad for him that he's going to see his daughter? And she says ... thank you for telling me.
Yeah.
I just think that's so clear, that happened, and I just don't ever see anybody talking about it.
Yeah, I had meant to bring it up. I forgot to put it in the notes, but I'm glad we got to it. That wasn't the way I saw it, but not saying that is wrong or that I'm right. Like maybe it is something that maybe I should have picked up on, but I definitely got like he says he's going to go back to his family. I was like, that's not what's going to happen in reality. He just told May that so that May would, help pass along his story and help him, get out of there. But what I liked about this too is that the portrayal of the pastor is, there are a lot of people, religious people, who walk the walk and they legitimately try to help people. And that's what this pastor is doing. She is okay with making everybody else uncomfortable, a little bit, slightly uncomfortable, if it means that she can help Bruce, and that she is legitimately trying to do the right thing. And we just, I feel like, maybe it's the media I consume, but I just feel like we don't have a lot of portrayals of characters like that, but there are people like that. And I really liked that, like, no, in fact, the pastor is not evil. The church in the town is probably helping people out a lot, and she's really trying to help this guy.
Well, if this were a JRPG, the church would be bad, but it's not.
You would fight the church at the end. Yeah.
Yeah. No, Pastor K lives by her philosophy. She tells May this on their first meeting. Nobody said loving your neighbor was easy.
Yeah.
Love and goodness and virtue takes work. And she, like you said, she walks the walk. Mm-hmm. It's beautiful. I love it.
Yeah. And I don't want to, I'm not going to assume, the religious beliefs of the creators, but I would be very surprised if everybody involved in the production of this game thought super highly of the church. Just the way that, other beliefs in the game are shown. And if I'm wrong, then tell me I'm wrong. But I don't think I'm going out on a huge limb here. And then the intelligence to know that there are people who are actually trying their best to do good with the position that they have, in the town, the small town, people will at least hear the pastor out. The town council doesn't help her, and her plan doesn't work because they push back too hard, I think. But I just thought that this was really, really good. A good portrayal of somebody involved in something that is often negatively portrayed, but this is also what it's like out there sometimes.
Yeah. Pastor K represents religious ideals, not organized religion. I think it's a good way to say it.
That's a much, you said it in like 6 words, and I had to take like 3 minutes to get there. So that's why you're here, man.
I don't know about that. Jeez Louise.
Well, is there anything else about Night in the Woods here that we skipped over? Did you hang out with Germ, by the way?
Like once or twice, he's hanging around those drifters and he's like, yeah, I didn't know him. I have a feeling that I missed some of Germ's hangouts. I don't know why, but I feel like I did.
Same here. It's just something that's not going to be part of the conversation then. I hear people say like, I fucking love Germ and I got to hang out with Germ and it was amazing. And I like never had the chance, really.
I love how socially awkward he is.
Yeah.
I love at the very end when he finds May after May climbs out of the well, which by the way is sort of like a being born again metaphor, right? We're not going to go down that route, but when she sees him there, she's like, "Oh, Germ, thank goodness you're here. Like, do you have rope?" Because she wants to help get everybody out, and he's like, "Yeah." And then they just stand there, and she's like, "Can you go get it?" And then he's like, "Yeah," and then he leaves. That cracks me up every time.
Yeah, it's good stuff. So, all right, well, there's a mystery. If anyone listening hung out with Germ and wants to let us know what that's all about, please do. And this will be a good way to say, here's where we wrap this up. And feel free to share any thoughts about, the way we analyze this and your own thoughts in the Discord server over the coming week. We'd really love to have more conversation about Night in the Woods because there's a lot going on here. It's really complex. For a 12-hour game, this game has a lot to say, and there's a lot of ways that you can see what it has. But I'm satisfied with the conversation here. Rick, thank you so much for, again, taking quite a long time to come on here and go through this stuff with me. It's always a pleasure.
Yeah, of course. I am always happy to come on down to the town of Possum Springs and talk about Night in the Woods and to come onto this podcast. I mean, I'd come as often as you'd like.
Yeah, thank you. Again, I really appreciate it, man. Every time I have one of these games with, a ton going on in the story like this, Lisa the Painful, I know you're going to bring the heat, which you did today. So again, I appreciate it and can't wait till the next one.
Yeah, of course. Like I said, man, I'm happy to come on anytime. It's, not everybody, you can't always choose who you're going to have great chemistry with. And I think we do. So I'm always happy to talk.
Appreciate that. And everybody else listening, I, first of all, would encourage you once again, as I'm taking us away, as you listen to the music at the end of the episode, to click around on what Pixel Project Radio has in the archives and find yourself some episodes to listen to. Perhaps if you want more Night in the Woods, that is a great place to start because I remember that episode being fantastic. Rick and Ben have that closeness to the setting, both of them, that led to a really great conversation there. And how do I end the show? Yes, thank you for listening all the way to the end. You're my hero. And tune in next week for the next game to come out of the backlog.
Hey, Nerf herders.
You sure you want to go with that?
Hey, everyone?
There we go. More inviting.
Have you ever had a movie that you really wanted to love, but something holds you back?
Or one that you did love in spite of a flaw?
Well, I'm Case Aiken.
And I'm Sam Alisea.
And on Another Pass, we sit down with cool guests to look at movies that we find fascinating.
But flawed.
And we try to imagine what could have been done when they were made to give them that little push.
We're not experts. We just believe in criticism.
Constructive criticism.
Sure.
So come take another pass at some movies with us.
And every now and then, we can celebrate movies that did it on their own, too.
You can find us at certainpov.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
Pass it on.
Do you have a gaming subscription service like Xbox Game Pass or a crazy backlog and don't know what to play next? Well, 1H1D might be for you. Join me, Chris, and my college buddy Tom as we play a random game or a requested game for an hour and decide if it's worth playing past that hour. We go over the good, the bad, and maybe some little tidbits about the development you might not have known. Got 30 minutes? Give us a try, and if you like it, throw us a 5-star review. Try something new. You never know what might be your next favorite game.